In this video, we're going to learn how to pass data into a component. We've already learned about property binding, and we're already using it in our templates. Here, we're binding to a class property, and in previous videos, we've also done things such as input, and we've used the property binding to a value. Now, the same concept applies when it comes to binding component data. So what we'll do to neaten this up is put these on new lines. Now, to display the passenger count, what we're going to do is basically bind the array of passengers to this component. So I like to do these on new lines and then indent them slightly. And we're going to call this binding items. So we're going to say items equals passengers. Now, if this is looking confusing, again, think about input and value. So this is doing a similar thing. It's binding to our custom component via a one-way binding. This is also a one-way binding, and it's looking up a property. Now, this property does not exist on our passenger count. So what we need to do is go into our passenger count component and tell this component to expect an input binding called items. We should be used to this in TypeScript at the moment, so we can declare items as a property, and we would just say passenger array. Because this items is going to be an array of passengers, it's going to be a passenger array. Now it's underlined red because we haven't imported the interface. So what we'll do is import passenger from ... and then models and then passenger.interface. So you can see the nice auto completion with TypeScript here as well. What we'll do is make this slightly larger than the other one just so we can see what's actually happening here. Now we have the items property declared on our class. You could think that we could do this and just say items. However, Angular needs to know that you are trying to pass this piece of information as a binding. And we do this through a decorator called input. So you can simply import the word input from the Angular core, and all we need to do is just simply add the decorator above this particular input. So this then talks to our items and tells Angular that this is going to be an input binding. Now what we're going to do from here is actually copy this h3 tag across, and we'll just delete this because we're going to replace it with our new component. And inside here, we're going to create a div, and we'll just write the words total passengers. So because items is an array of passengers, we can now use this expression. So we can do items, and because we want to know the total, we can do items.length. So just to show you in the browser that that is in fact our custom component, we'll add an exclamation here. And we obviously have our new addition of the total passengers. So let's go and check this out in the browser. So you can see here that we have airline passengers and the total passengers of 5. So you've now learned how to create a custom component, a container component, and your first stateless child component. And we've now passed some data into that component itself. So let's go back and continue. One thing we might want to say is total checked in, so we can actually see how many passengers have checked in. So what we're going to do is a calculation, and we're going to actually bind it to the template. Now this component does not need its constructor, so we are going to create a function called checkedInCount. So inside this function, first of all, we are going to make sure that there are items available. So if there are items, we can continue. However, we're going to invert this expression and simply return if there are no items. So before the component has been initialized, we can actually just return out of this function because the items might not be available at this point in time. Now, to actually calculate this, what we can do is return this.items.filter, and just like before, we can pass in each passenger. So here is an individual passenger object. And this is where TypeScript plays in nicely again, because we can say it's of type passenger. Let me save this one and hide it so we can see what's going on a little bit better. So we have returned this.items.filter, and we're going to use an arrow function inside of here. Now, all we need to do inside of filter is return the passenger, and in TypeScript, we can press the dot and we can see the available properties on these actual objects. So we are going to see whether they are checked in or checked out. If they're checked out, it's going to return us an array of all the passengers that are checked in. And all we're going to do on the end is simply do .length. So this is actually going to return just a number of passengers that are checked in. Now on our function declaration, what we could do is just say that this is going to return a number. So this is how we do this in TypeScript and say that this function then returns a number. So to add this to our template, we can take this function, and what we can do is create another expression, and we can actually call this function in the template. Now here I'm going to add a slash. Now you can see that this is outside of these braces. This isn't doing any maths. This is literally going to display 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5 potential passengers that have been checked in or not. So let's go ahead and check this out in the browser. So you can see that we have total checked in 3 out of 5. So our function logic is working correctly. The final thing we'll do is make this a shorthand arrow function so we can keep this even smaller. And that's all we need to do. So we can return items.filter, we iterate the passenger, we return whether they are checked in, and we simply do the .length. So as far as we're concerned, this component is fully complete, and it does its one thing that it's intended to do. We have our input binding of the items. We simply just render them out in the DOM by using the length property. We can do a custom calculation if we want to, and locally we'll display the checked in count of our passengers.